You are tuning in to the Atlanta Realtors Rundown, the official podcast for the Atlanta Realtors. We're here to keep you updated with the latest trends, topics, and keep you in the know of our ever-changing Atlanta market. We hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, familia. This is Manny Recinos, and I am so happy to be back with you here on the Realtor Rundown. And today we have the privilege of sitting down with one of the ARA MVPs, Mr. Reggie McCrary. And he is the Chief Executive Officer here at the Atlanta REALTORS Association. Welcome, Reggie.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And MVP, that's a compliment. I'll take it.
Listen. This is the man that you have seen walking around. He's creeping in corners during orientation. He's listening in to the information that's being given and fact checking us as we go along. And that is actually one of the reasons that I wanted to sit down with you, Reggie, is because so many times, we are part of this association and we are just learning things as we go along. I've now been part for over 5 years, here with the Atlanta Realtors. And really, apart from the fact that we were founded, in 1910 and we've been around for about 112 years, there's a lot of the history that I don't know. And you have been a resource in the past. You're someone that people come to with questions. So I wanted to sit down and see if you can share some of that history and we can dig into things that have changed, and things that are very interesting to learn about our past so we know how to move forward in the future, right?
Sure, absolutely.
All right. So I want to start with a very basic kind of intro. I would love to know how long you've been with the Atlanta Realtors Association and how you became involved.
All right. Well, let's see. Let's first thank you for what you're doing. Man, you've done a tremendous job with this whole podcast setup, and you're active through the 5 years and what you've done, and congrats on all the awards you're getting now and all the recognition. So really do appreciate that. And that's kind of an idea of like why you get involved in this and why we like our jobs the way we do is because of all the members that are there. Yeah. It's working with all the members. So I got started back in the association in 1988, believe it or not. So I was straight out of college, and I was a typical college grad. You got your degree, and you're trying to find a job, and you don't know what you want to do in your life, and you just start looking for opportunities. And I interviewed with Tommy Jackson, who was the executive vice president at the time, and she fortunately saw something in me and decided to give me the try. So I started out in the accounting department. So I had a accounting degree at the University of Alabama, and they asked me if I knew how to run a network. And what do you say as a college kid looking for a job? You say, absolutely.
Yep.
I know exactly what it is. And the network consisted of one computer sitting on a desk, and then a wire was running to another computer sitting on another desk, and that was considered our network at the time. So that's kind of where I got started back in 1988.
Wow, we've come a long way since.
Yeah, yeah, that was quite interesting back then.
That's amazing. No wonder. I mean, such a wealth of knowledge. Since you've been here since college, since you graduated from college, yeah. That's amazing.
Don't know what else to do now.
Yeah. Well, you're stuck with us now. And your passion for the organization is very obvious. People see it, even from emerging leaders that go through kind of that intro class with you. They come out with such knowledge and an understanding. So I got to ask, what about the organization's history and background makes you so passionate about it?
Well, you just referenced the Emerging Leaders Program, and that's kind of an idea there as well. As we started that program back in, I want to say 2001 was probably our first year that we ever did it, 2001, 2002, and started that program, and it was kind of our version of a leadership program for trying to grow new leaders in the organization, trying to get more people involved in that. And, we started that, and then the program that you just referenced that we do at the beginning of that is all talking about if we want to establish leaders and we want to get people involved in the organization, they got to know the history first. And so we talk a lot about what Atlanta's done. And when you ask me what I like about it, it's like it's all the firsts that we have in our history. You sit there and you're very proud of that when you start looking back at things and what we've accomplished as an organization and why we want to look back at that and see and celebrate those accomplishments. So, when I first started, I didn't know what I was getting into. My mom had her license. She's a realtor. She's past president of a local association here in the Metro Atlanta area, and I didn't really know what it was. I just knew when my mom got her license and I was a little kid, and she said, "Hey, when I get a closing, I'm going to give you $10." And I was like, "Cool." So I'd ask her every day, "Do you have a closing?" That kind of thing. So I didn't really know, but when you get involved in it, we're an organization now that we hit over 14,000 members this year.
Wow.
And so we get the opportunity on the staff side of this to work with all these great leaders. I mean, you get to work with the people on the emerging leader side that are just fresh and starting out. And then you also obviously are working with our past presidents who have done some tremendous things. So just getting to know all the people, getting to build those relationships, getting to work with the quality of people that we've got the opportunity to, that's kind of what's driving it the whole time. Is just the people. It's that side of it. You never know. Excuse me. You never know from year to year what you're going to get as far as personalities. Who the president's going to be and their personality versus the next year, your committee chairs, your volunteers. So I just look at it, and I've told this people over and over again that I feel like my job is, I don't really call it a job, but my position is it's a lifelong leadership course, because every year you're working with different leaders and different qualities, and what you try to do is you try to look at what made them successful to put them in this position. Like, what did they do? Like, what did you do to put yourself here in this position of being our experts on the podcast? You look at what everybody's trying to do, and you try to figure out, what can I do to emulate that? What can I do to add that to my repertoire of things that I can do, and see if I can do it, obviously not as well, but you just want to look at what the traits are of every person that's coming through. And so I look at it that way. It's like, what did all the leaders do, and how did they get to be the president, or how did they get to be the chair, or whatever position they're in, and see, what can I take from that? What can we add on to it? So that's kind of what I love about it.
That's amazing. I had not thought of it in that way, as far as the transition of people that you have seen, the amount of leaders, like you said, and I didn't know there was a little real estate in your blood already.
Oh yeah,
so
my sister's got her license as well. So
there you go.
Yeah,
so a little bit about our
estate.
crazy, then. And we definitely can find ways to keep it exciting for you, I'm sure, throughout the years.
Yeah.
So you see the growth in people. You see kind of how different leadership styles evolve and that kind of thing. What about kind of some events? I mean, if we're going, through a timeline here. I know this is a very big loaded question, but since 1910, what's happened? I'm just kidding. but really, I mean,
we've got what's our emerging leaders program? It's like an hour-long session about all this, about the history. So
no, we won't put everyone through the whole class. You got to become an emerging leader to sit through that. But no, I would love to hear kind of what some of the most significant events that you think have shaped ARA and the organization to what it is today.
Sure, absolutely. We'll try to, I guess, highlight a couple of them that we talk about in the program. And I mentioned earlier that Atlanta's got a lot of firsts. I'm really proud of that and proud of our history from that standpoint. But you referenced the fact that we started in 1910. We actually got our charter from NAR in 1911, but we celebrated 1910 as when we started. We actually preceded the state association, so GAR didn't exist at that time. We preceded the Real Estate Commission. So an interesting fact in all of this, when we start talking about things, is like, why did we create a code of ethics for the organization? Why is that important to us? Yeah. Well, back when it was created, there was no such thing as license law. So there were no standards at all in the industry in any way, shape, or form. Wow. So you look at the members at that point in time that created the organization, determined they needed to create some standards. They had to figure out some framework that they could all agree to work inside of and agree to cooperate in some way. And that was where they came up with the Code of Ethics.
It was the wild west.
It was. Of course, we weren't all there then, but that was it. There was no standard whatsoever, no contracts, no nothing. It was just all crazy. So they created the code to try to figure out how we're going to be able to work each other and trust each other. We're going to treat each other fairly from that standpoint. So that was a big one back in 1913 when that got created nationwide. And then, if you want to look at some of the important things, Atlanta's done as far as the association is concerned is, the Real Estate Commission. It took the realtors getting involved, going to the state assembly and saying, hey, we've got to create license law. We got to have something. And so the realtors were instrumental in getting the Real Estate Commission started, getting it created. and building it from there to the point to where it is today. You've got licensing aspects of it. The testing aspect, when the Real Estate Commission first got started, and actually when I first started, there was a gentleman that I met who had a 4-digit license number, maybe even 3-digit. I can't remember. He had one of the original licenses. He was an older gentleman. But he talked about, his version of a test was going down there and filling out a piece of paper and handing it to him and paying his fee, and that was his license. That's how he got his license. So you look at things like that and how far we've come from that to where we are now, and it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
As far as license law, if we just stick on that one topic, 1980 is kind of a significant time frame in real estate in Georgia, because that was when continuing education went into effect. So prior to that, you got your license and you didn't have to do anything for the rest of your career. You just continued to practice. You didn't do anything.
Wow. So
for years during the 70s, the realtors were trying to get requirements put in, like extra education, to make sure that people stayed in and stayed active and knew what they were doing. But they couldn't get it through the General Assembly. They couldn't get it passed. Wow. They couldn't get a bill passed to implement this. And the reason why is we had so many of our elected officials that were voting on this that had real estate licenses. And they didn't want to be required to take CE. Oh, wow. So they could block it because of the position that they were elected to. So the only way it got through was they added the grandfather clause to it, which meant that if you got your license prior to 1980, you didn't have to take any continuing education.
Sounds like I just missed
it. So starting January 1st. And you can know this by looking at every single license number. If it's a 6-digit number, if it starts at 100,000 or greater, that's somebody who got their license after 1980.
Ah, look at that.
And so they have, they've got the CE requirements in place.
A little something to look out for when you're, doing a contract with someone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, and that's again mind blowing, right? To the modern age of real estate, right? Because we have to keep educating ourselves. Yep. We have to stay, up to the latest as far as contracts and what we're putting our clients through. So it's pretty mind blowing to hear that there was a time, right, when you look back where that wasn't required, and the fact that you had individuals that said, "This is perfect the way it is. I want to live in a world where I don't have to do that CE credit," and knowing that that was a hurdle. That's right. Wow.
And you'll see most people, I mean, by now we're, 42 years after that time period, you'll see people that still have licenses prior to 1980, but most of them that I know that are involved still they're doing their classes. They're doing everything because they know they need it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Plus, it usually comes with a free lunch, so we love that. You gotta love that. Wow, that's amazing. Any other kind of astonishing or facts that you think would surprise us about our history? Maybe lessons that we have learned, or not every history is a perfect, beautiful bow. I mean, there are a lot of things when you look at, the history of a country, the history of organizations that have been around like this for over 100 years. What kind of stands out to you as far as accomplishments and things that we've overcome?
Well, let's stay on the positive side first, and then we'll kind of go into that. So the positive part, some of the things I keep mentioning, Atlanta being a first, is, here's an interesting tidbit. This is something. So I learned a lot. So I mentioned Tommy Jackson hired me, and Tommy was the EVP at the time, and she retired in 1993, and she had been started off as secretary and ended up as executive vice president. She'd been here for 53 and a half years.
Okay.
So I was hired by a legend. I mean, she won the national award as the top AE in the whole country.
Wow.
In 93 when she was retiring. So phenomenal person. But I learned a lot of the history through her. She would just tell stories. For example, we were driving through Buckhead going to a meeting one day, and she just looked at me and said, "Oh, I named that street."
Oh, my.
And it was one of those things, you had heard so many things out of her about all the history and everything you've done, and it was kind of one of those things you just go, "Wait, what? What did you name? What do you mean you named that street?" And she could tell you about developers that were coming out, and they would have to go take their plans and take them to the city. And of course, if you're developing and building a neighborhood, you've got to have streets and you got to have street names.
Yeah.
And so people had come to her and said, "Hey, Tommy, I got, help me name these streets." And she would sit down and help them with name the streets, and they would get, so just little things like that. But
yeah, that's amazing.
But one of the cool stories that I just didn't even realize at the time was because, we had appraisers. You've got appraisal licensing that's going on now. The association and Tommy used to do all the appraisals in the city.
Oh,
The association was the appraiser. If they needed an appraisal done on a property, they would come to the association and turn it in, and she would do the appraisal. And I remember we moved into the building that we're in right now. I remember cleaning out the storage closet that we had, and there was, appraisals from like 1940s and 1950s, and
Wow.
oh, it was crazy, stuff like that. But
That is an institution right there.
Yeah, that was kind of a cool thing. Of course, they stopped doing it when more and more people started getting into that profession as their full-time career, getting into being an appraiser. And it's changed and evolved today. But Atlanta, we talked about first. Atlanta was the very first organization to create the sales awards. So we created the $1 Million Club back in the 50s.
Yeah.
Came out, that became something that took off nationwide, recognizing people. We created it and awarded our first members back in 1959. So that's kind of how old the $1 Million Club is now called Top Producers, but that's how old that is. And believe it or not, we had 12 people back in 1959 that produced more than $1 million in business.
Wow.
Which, think about it.
Yeah,
That's a lot of transactions back then. Of course, most of it was doing some commercial properties.
Yeah.
But one of the gentlemen, this is one of our cool things in history, was one of the gentlemen that was one of our first recipients of the $1 Million Club recognition was named by Sam Massell. Mm-hmm. Sam ended up being eventually mayor of Atlanta.
Oh, wow.
And then he's the gentleman that everybody kind of for the last 20, 30 years of his life was kind of the unofficial mayor of Buckhead. He was just an instrumental figure in the city. But a lot of people didn't know later on in his life that he was involved in real estate first and was part of our first group in the $1 Million Club. So that's kind of a cool thing there.
Yeah, it goes to show how big that reach is when you're a realtor and you're part of that community.
Yeah. But yeah, so that was kind of cool. Some other events.
Commercial, actually.
Yeah. So we've another first for Atlanta was back in the 80s. This is really right when I was. They had talked about it a lot when I was getting hired, but we were in the process of creating a separate. Everybody was kind of coming up with names, whether it was going to be a committee, a chapter, a council, whatever it was going to be. So what we ended up doing in the 80s was we separated out our commercial and residential members and created what we called two societies all inside the association. Mm-hmm. So we had a commercial society, and we elected a president for that, and we had a residential society, and we elected a president for that. And the reason we did it inside the umbrella of the association is because the National Association of Realtors had some requirements in place, and back then, you had to join the association wherever your office was located.
Wow.
So you couldn't just join any association. Yeah. So if you had an office in, let's say, Cobb County, you had to join the Cobb Association first. And if you also wanted to be part of Atlanta, let's say you were a commercial member and you wanted to do that, you had to join a secondary. So it cost you more.
Yeah.
So we created the commercial society, and then we started lobbying the National Association about some changes that could take place. And eventually NAR did change their guidelines and allowed for what they called a commercial overlay board. And so we applied because we were instrumental in getting the language developed. And my very first national convention that I ever attended, we got to walk to the stage because Atlanta was the very first, got the charter for the very first commercial overlay board in the whole country.
Wow.
And so that was my,
That's
my first experience going to a national convention. And, there's 1,000 people on the board of directors, and you're looking at this, and Atlanta is highlighted from the stage by the president of the association. It was really kind of a cool experience for me. So that kind of brought me in and made me really proud there for what we were doing.
That's direct results out of the work and the research, and like you said, you had to work on wording and all of that, and the language of creating this. So and that's very important because there are, when people think real estate, they usually kind of go straight to the residential realtor.
Exactly.
And I have conversations with so many commercial realtors that want to make sure. I can't imagine not even having, that sector of a board. So, again, came a long way there.
Yeah, and so we became, at that point in time, we kind of became the model. Mm-hmm. We created it, and so we split off, and the association at that point in time, it was called the Atlanta Board of Realtors back then, but we split off 30% of the entire membership then. Wow. And so we started the organization with about 900 to 1,000 people was what our commercial association was then. And now we're the largest, obviously the oldest because we were the first. We call it the most prestigious, got the commercial association here in Atlanta. 2,500 members strong, and virtually every large firm that has a presence in Atlanta is part of the association. And it's not only just a part, but they're on the board of directors. Wow. The representative, the leaders of their organizations are there. So that's really something we're proud of after now the history of building all of that.
Wow. That's incredible. Yeah. You also mentioned, I love our building, right? And it's one of the staples for the Atlanta Realtors Association. Can you tell us a little bit about when the building came about, how it came about, how important it's been to the association?
Yeah, so that was, again, right when I was getting started. We had, back in the mid-'80s, or early '80s really, the members started talking about we want a home. We really want to build a presence so that we can call something our home, because the association was originally, the first offices we had was down in the Healy building downtown, and that's kind of, talk about it in a minute, that's come full circle there. Yeah. But we were in the Healy building downtown because that was where a lot of the brokerages operated out of. And then we moved to Northside Drive, just north of the city, back in the early 70s. And then through that time period, they were growing and they were trying to figure out, okay, we want some property. And they did some studies and figured out that 80% of the membership was north from Buckhead north at that time. Mm-hmm. And so they decided on Sandy Springs and started looking for some property, and that's where we decided on the location there. So they built the building. We opened it up in, I guess, March 1st of '89 was the first day that we were in operation here. Wow. And back then, when we were building it, we had all of these promises from all of these people that said, yes, we're going to rent space. We agree to do it. We're going to jump right in, and here's the dollar amounts we're talking about. So we ran all of our metrics, ran all of our numbers, and everything was great. Well, in '88 was the last good year in real estate at that point in time, and from '88 to about '91, it started dropping off. Yeah. So we move into the building, we go back to all these members that said they wanted to move in. They're like, well, I can get a better rate where I am right now. So it was really a tough time as the economy was slowing down, membership was declining. Yeah. And we now move into this $4 million building, and we were like, how do we pay for this now? Yeah. So that got real interesting.
Gosh. Yeah, because and sometimes people don't even realize, because as you walk in, you're downstairs, you come in for classes, you come in for seminars, but there's a whole upstairs area where there are offices, and like you said, I mean, spaces that people rent out for themselves and their business. So it's an incredible resource for sure.
Yeah, so 30 years later, fast forward now, it's a 40,000 square foot building. As you said, we've got about 45 tenants in the building. We're 100% occupied, got a waiting list. We've changed the ground floor, so now we started out with one classroom. Now we've really got 4, plus a smaller area that can be for a small class. So we're really at 5 total, 2 major conference rooms, and so those are used by a lot of the members. Yeah, we use them for our school, we use them for our association events, and then a lot of our real estate companies will come in and use the space as well. So it served the purpose of what we wanted it to do back when they first started talking about this back in the '80s.
Absolutely.
So, and it's all full paid off, so we're good. We're debt free. That's a big thing.
Don't worry, y'all. We don't need to start, a GoFundMe for the building.
Exactly.
We're good now.
Yeah. We did back in like '89, '90. That was a little tough, but now we're in great shape.
I believe it. I believe it. Well, Atlanta has long been a center for Black wealth, higher education, political power, and culture for sure. How is that shift? How have you seen that shift, or as knowing about the history of Atlanta? How has that shift really moved forward since the beginning of the association?
Well, we talk a lot about the first that we've done, but this is probably an area where we have not done what we needed to do. We have not, what I would call, succeeded from a historical standpoint. If you go back into, let's just go back a couple of years where the association decided to issue a letter of apology, and that was as a result of some decisions and policies and procedures that the association had in place 50, 60, 70 years ago. Yeah. And, the decisions they had at that point in time resulted in we could not have women in leadership. You couldn't have, African-American members at all. So it was basically a white male-dominated organization. Yeah. And it was a club, if you want to think about it. I mean, you had to apply and you had to have references and things like that. So, from that spun off the Women's Council. That was how that got created. and it was basically nationwide. Everybody was doing the same thing. And then you had, NAREP got started. Got started here in Atlanta. So those were things that we aren't proud of. If you go back, one of the things that I had to go back and research that we were talking about a little bit earlier before we jumped on here was I had to go back and try to figure out, who was the very first black member that we ever had in the association. And fortunately, we had the files for this, and we went back to it, and through some conversations with the Empire Board and some of our members, we went back and I found the gentleman's application, and it was Ron Wilson back in, get this, 1972.
Wow.
I mean, so, it seems old to us. That's 50 years ago.
But that's just.
But it's 1972, not 1960, 50, 40.
Yeah.
It was 72. So that's something you look at and go, wow, we found this, but why did it take so long?
Yeah.
What was going on back then?
Yeah.
Now you want to fast forward to all of that, and it took us forever. I mean, we didn't have our first female president until 1976.
Wow, that's amazing.
I mean, think about it. We were founded in 1910, so we didn't have it in 76. Now, even more of an embarrassment, we didn't have our first black president until 2015.
Wow.
So we were over 100 years old at the time.
Yeah.
And that was Ennis Antoine, a man that I dearly love and respect tremendously.
Yes, another staple in our community and
absolutely.
Here at the association.
And then when we can celebrate, and everybody we've had the annual meeting now and recognized our 22 folks, and Karen Hatcher, who is our first, I hate classification on this, but because she's just a phenomenal person overall, but people are going to refer to her. She was our first female black president that we had.
Yeah.
But Karen, you can't put any labels on her, and you can't put any labels on Ennis. I mean, they're just phenomenal people, and
absolutely.
I mean, unbelievable minds and thought process, and what they've added to the association is you can't even put it in words.
Yeah, but I mean, as a younger 5 years into the industry member, it is incredible to sit in a meeting and hear. I was there when she was installed, and to hear those words, she's very proud of that, I know, and she repeats it because it's astonishing to hear first black female president in over 100 and what did we say, 122, 12 years? Yeah. I mean, that's incredible that we're still having those firsts, but that is history, and that's why I wanted this conversation, because we have to. Everyone makes mistakes, right? We hear that associations have a long history like this, and you have to look at those things that were problematic, that were issues. I remember when Cynthia Lippert presented that letter, and in some circles it was controversial. You heard kind of why is it happening, but really, I mean, there were past actions and discriminatory practices that prevented black realtors, as you mentioned, and clients from purchasing, property, and that's a basic fact that we are now overcoming, and we're realizing, and we're moving forward, and that creates spaces for all these other diversity organizations that you can look them up. They're recognized by the National Association of Realtors, some of which you mentioned, but we're moving into a lot of those spaces that were denied a lot of that privilege, and it's amazing to see how far we've come.
Yeah, and if you want to be, like me, I'm looking at it. I'm always proud of where I work and what we do and everything about it. And I look at Atlanta, and I'm so proud of this when I start going to national meetings. Is you look at what we've done over the last couple of years now, and the whole idea is, that diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that is going in every corporation all over the country. And everybody throws around the DEI, but the inclusion part of it is really what we've kind of focused on in the association, is just making sure we can get as many people involved, making sure that everybody's welcome, because everybody pays the same amount of dues, everybody has their same licensing aspect, everybody's the exact same.
Yeah.
Bring everybody in, and we've done a tremendous job of that over the last couple of years. When we've actually hired, we have an employee that's now focused on that. You mentioned some of the affiliated organizations that we're now trying to partner up with. We've had loose relationships with these groups over all the historical years that we've had here, but we've never had anything that's been very formal, and there's never been any ongoing dialogue between it. And now we have that in place, where we have 5 multicultural organizations that we've signed partnerships with. The presidents of those organizations now serve on the board of directors for the Atlanta Realtors. Obviously, they are all joining the association and becoming involved. And that's something I'm really proud of, is taking that next step. And I say that from a standpoint of around the country, there are a lot of people who have talked about this, but they haven't actually done things. So now I'll go back to when we created the commercial board. We were getting phone calls from around the country from everybody saying, how'd you do this? What'd you do?
Yeah.
Now we're getting the same type of phone calls to Gilly, who's on our team now that's helping us with this. She's getting calls from people all over the country like, can you help us get the same type of thing established in our area? Mm-hmm. So Atlanta, once again, is setting the standard.
Yeah.
You know, something that you really want to be proud of.
Yeah, and she's the director of community engagement and diversity, and that just brings it full circle. You know, as we talked about, there are these bleeps in the history that we go, okay, that was wrong, and then here we are, current 2022, now instating a director of community engagement and diversity, and that's a big step. And like you said, people will look at us as that trailblazer, and that is a sense of pride there for sure. I wanted to ask, we mentioned some amazing people already, some past presidents, but with such a rich history, are there any past leaders of the organization that maybe we haven't mentioned that stand out to you?
You're going to make me single out a single president? That gets me in trouble here.
I wasn't going to say good or bad, but
Well, I can't answer that question without talking about Tommy Jackson first. I've already referenced her in this. Tommy was, as I referenced earlier, was the executive vice president, and she was basically my mentor. She hired me when I started in '88, and my first day when I walked in the door, I looked at this lady and she said, "Young man, I just want to tell you, I started 48 years ago today."
Oh, wow.
And I was like, ooh, I felt so small at that point. But I got the opportunity of working with her for about 5.5 years before she retired. And then after that, she was still active in the industry and would call me and say, "Young man, you know, I'm just trying to look out for you and I'm trying to protect you." And she would help me out with things. So that was where any conversation about historical influence in the organization's got to start with Tom. And of course, you know, the building is named after her. She was such a legacy. So that's phenomenal there. But some others, I mean, we've had such a rich history. We've got the conference room is named after Frank Carter. He was a prominent commercial member, helped develop a bunch of Atlanta. If I remember correctly, it was like Lenox and Phipps Plaza. I mean, he was the developer for all of that. So he had a rich history there. But one person I do know personally, it was kind of a cool story, is Carl Schultz. And that's a name that most people don't know. It's probably something to surprise. Nobody even would bring this come up. But Carl was president of the association. He's a commercial appraiser. Mm-hmm. So he was the first commercial appraiser that we had as president of the organization. Carl went on to become president of the state association, and then he became president of the Appraisal Foundation, which is a nationwide organization.
Wow.
After that, and I say after because where else do you go from that standpoint? Carl then started going around the world and helping countries implement appraisal standards around the world. I mean, he was teaching classes and teaching people how to be an appraiser, and he was working with governments trying to help them establish standards, laws, whatever, practices, licensing, whatever it is in their country. I mean, he was all over the world doing this. So that's somebody that, you know, from an Atlanta standpoint, you're like, wow, this man's doing this from Atlanta. That's kind of cool.
Incredible, yeah.
And he was one of our past presidents. So that's kind of a huge, huge reference when I go and you start asking about it. But there have been so many. I mean, I could go back and name, you know, as president after president. It's been leaders of companies. I mean, the largest residential association. I mean, real estate companies out there. I mean, all the leaders have been presidents historically. Our commercial organizations, I mean, again, because going back prior to the formation of the commercial board, we had commercial presidents all through there. So, I mean, anybody and everybody who was prominent in the city has served in a leadership capacity. Or Ward White, I mean, I go all the way back. Ward served in 1922 and 1940. So Ward in 1940 was the one that hired Tommy.
Oh, wow.
Ward then, that's another conference room we have, the White Conference Room. Mm-hmm. So Ward had, I want to say 5 children. 2 of his sons became president of the Atlanta board. One of them became president of the state association. One of his daughters, Alice McDonough, served as the president of the association back in 2004, I believe. So I got the opportunity to work with her. Alice's daughter, White Mixon, also served as a president. She was president in 2011.
Oh my gosh. The whole dynasty.
Alice's sister married a gentleman. Excuse me, Alice's sister had a daughter by the name of Selma. She married Tom Spurlin. Tom Spurlin was president in 1999.
Wow.
So you think about that, it's that one family. You talk about prominent in the history of our association. I mean, Ward White started, and he was kind of Ward White Sr., and then you had, Stewart, Ward White Jr., Alice McDonough, and then White and Tom. I mean, all that came from that family.
Yeah.
As presidents and leaders of our organization. So, sorry, I didn't mean to go on the historical side there with
I
that family, but that's just kind of a cool story because you walk into one of our conference rooms named after the White family, you're like, why is this? Well, that's kind of the reason you had so many presidents come from it.
These are the things that I never knew or never thought of, as I'm running to meetings and sitting in those rooms.
Yeah, it's just like, that's kind of thing when you're sitting in there and you're like, okay, who are these people? There's some stories. There's some great stories behind those scenes.
Absolutely.
Behind all of that.
Wow. Well, listen, I have really enjoyed sitting here today. Before we kind of finish up, I wanted to ask, is there any last little tidbit or kind of what you see, that you're excited about in the future for the association?
Well, I mean, I'm always about the leadership. You're looking at it from a standpoint of, I look at it and say, okay, who's coming in as our 2023 president, who we're going to get the opportunity to work with. But you start to look down the road and you start to look at the wealth of talent that's coming up. And, I'm getting to that age now where I can say the younger generation. I feel like the old man here. But it is kind of cool to see that coming through there. And it just creates that excitement every year. This is a time, when you get into a career and you start doing a job and, everybody's going to go through their ups and downs all the time. But you look at what generates that enthusiasm, that energy, and it's looking at the people. Yeah. It's knowing who the opportunities are that this person could be your president. I could be sitting across from our president and whatever year, Manny, what do you want to do it? We'll pick a year for you. You could, the opportunities that are there and the enthusiasm and the energy that our members bring to the table. That's what I look at. That's the excitement aspect of it. I mean, our industry, I heard back in 93 when I went to Washington to the NAR convention, there was the famous, we don't have time to go into that, Lions Over the Hill speech, and that's just something else. But it was all about technology is going to take over the industry, and the agents are going to be wiped out.
Yeah.
And I was told the agents are going to be gone in 5 years. Then it was 5 more years. Then it was 5 more years. And here we are in 22. Membership's at an all-time record.
Yeah.
And it's all about the people. You guys do a phenomenal job in the transactions, and it's all about the people and the relationships you build. And that's what drives me. That's what drives, and that drives our whole team, all of our staff, is what drives them, is the involvement and the relationships that you can build. So I'm all excited about that and constant.
Yeah. I love to hear that. Well, you've given us an amazing insight into the evolution of this association. I mean, from the licensing to the building and, as you mentioned, most importantly, the people that are that have kept us moving forward and are going to keep driving this forward, in our industry. So thank you so much, Reggie. I really, really appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule to sit down with us. I know this is a bit out of your comfort zone.
Anybody that knows me, this is not what I like to be doing. I like sitting in the back of the room and letting our volunteers, you guys are our leaders, y'all need to have the stage and the spotlight.
But I love that this, through this platform, this information can be conveyed, right, in a very different way. And like I said, very grateful to have you here.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for all you're doing. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, listen, everyone, I want to thank you for learning with me today here on the Atlanta Realtors Rundown. And until next time, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for tuning in to the Atlanta Realtors Rundown. Please subscribe, and for more information on how to get engaged, check us out at atlantarealtors.com. We look forward to having you join us for the next episode.